So let's turn from Rory McIlroy and the golf itself to find out a bit more about our new Masters champion. To that end, we have a regular on the Golf Weekly podcast, Shane Ryan, author of Slaying the Tiger, A Year Inside the Ropes on the new PGA Tour, written a couple of years ago now. Shane, evening to you.
How you guys doing?
Very well. So it's good to have you on Off the Ball. We've spoken to you a few times, naturally, about your book because you spent a year on the tour and got to know various figures on the tour, and it was kind of a post-Tiger Woods time as well. And Patrick Reed was one of those players you got to know or tried to get to know. First of all, yesterday, it was very noteworthy that on the first, the crowd were largely with Rory McIlroy. Even Patrick Reed admitted as much afterwards. And certainly on the TV feed I was looking at on the 18th, Patrick Reed's reception was subdued to the point of almost being slightly awkward.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I think Alan Shipnuck in his Sports Illustrated story had that specific thing. He said on the 18th green, it was almost an awkward feeling. And then there was another story. In fact, a lot of the stories that were written really focused on this idea that Reed wasn't loved by the crowd, that they were rooting first for Rory and then for Spieth and then finally for Ricky Fowler, pretty much anyone but him. And I thought it was actually, I think Ryan Lavner at Golf Channel highlighted that quote by Reed that Rory was getting a bigger cheer on the opening tee, and I thought it was kind of sad because he was trying to frame it in the sense that, oh no, it only motivated me more. It kind of juiced me up. It got my competitive spirits flowing. But it's also a pretty big rejection, and I don't think there's many people anywhere who don't get hurt by that kind of sting. And so it's. Yeah, you hear that and you're like, man, what a bittersweet, and I'm sure it's not that bittersweet for him because he just won the Masters, but still there has to be something there that's a little sad.
No, I thought so. He's playing in Georgia. He's a Georgia boy. It's his home crowd, and it's subdued, and they're not sure how they feel about him. And, you know, like within golf, your book has been talked about at large, and people knew of the allegations of cheating and theft against Reed from his college days. And people were vaguely aware he was estranged from his family. But when you kind of pierce through wider consciousness by competing and winning the Masters, then suddenly you've got articles all around the world saying you're the most hated man in golf, and you've got a bunch of people as well casually rubbernecking on his family situation, which is incredibly distressing. I must say, like, maybe it's because we've been watching Reed for a long time and sort of aware of those allegations and the situation. I felt a certain degree of sympathy for him, how he's been treated over the last 24, 48 hours.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think what's interesting is that Reed has adamantly refused to say anything about his family, and that's been the case for years. There's a couple of years ago where his wife put some stuff on Facebook that he grew up in an abusive home and things like that. But as it stands now, there's only one side of the story that's talking, and that's his family. And of course, the narrative they're pushing is that this guy just got stolen away by this evil woman who's his wife, and what an idyllic childhood he had. We were perfect parents, and now he's breaking our hearts, and how could he do this? And all we want is our poor kid back. And, I'm very skeptical of that. I've known a lot of people who have become estranged from their parents, both personally and people you see in athletics or in other celebrity fields. And I've never seen a case where that estrangement has happened without a good reason. And so I think there is something, I agree with you, the rubbernecking on his family. I think the context of his family is important, and I like the story that Alan Shipnuck wrote about it. But at the same time, I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that we don't know what happened, and we only know the bare minimum, and I think maybe if we did know the full story, we might feel pretty bad.
I would tend to agree, because as you said, it's too simplistic a version. It is evil wife comes along when Reed is 22, they get married, the parents... according to the parents, think it's going too fast, and it seems Reed cuts them callously out of his life, end of, and has them removed from the course of the 2014 US Open by police when they turn up to try and reconnect with him. I mean, again, not to add to the rubbernecking, but I even thought, really, should the parents be cooperating with the Alan Shipnuck article? Should they be dragging all this limelight to the situation? I mean, I didn't know if that was the best course of action either. The whole thing is just incredibly sad. I mean, more than anything, it jarred on the 18th when his family 10 miles away are not there to greet him, which is such an Augusta tradition.
Yeah, that's right. And the idea of would you have, if you can put yourself in the situation of if that was your child, would you have collaborated? And And the fact that they did, does that give you a little hint about what kind of people they are and maybe what kind of childhood Reed would have gone through? And I don't know. And I really don't know.
Yeah.
But it does say something, right? If your child had chosen to abandon you and it was entirely out of your control, I think probably I wouldn't run to the press. I would talk with my close friends about it and other family, and that's it. And Justine Reed has come in for a lot of criticism, Patrick Reed's wife, and probably some of it is warranted. But I think there's also an interesting dynamic there of if Reed did come from a challenging family background, it maybe stands to reason that where he would land is with another strong personality, maybe even a controlling personality like this, because it's what he knew and it's the patterns he grew up with. And again, I'm playing armchair psychologist. This is pure speculation. But I think there is something interesting there.
Well, let's park the family stuff because that's just so incredibly private. It's probably, doesn't need us speculating anymore. So where you do come in is Shane Ryan slaying the tiger a year inside the ropes on the new PGA Tour. I must say I've laughed because you've been quoted everywhere over the last number of days. It's your book, really, which is almost forming the bulk of the case against Patrick Reed, bad guy. So we've talked to you about the book before on the podcast. Short version is you spent a year on tour, and Reed was one of those figures you wanted to get to know a bit, and you did actually get to sit down with Reed and interview him and Justine, and then you went digging around his background. That's the genesis of this whole thing.
Yeah. The goal writing Slaying the Tiger was to document the rising generation of golfers, from Reed to Rory, Jason Day, Jordan Spieth, Ricky Fowler, all of them, and hopefully get something on who these people were, where they came from, what their life was like. And quickly on tour, there was an Ian O'Connor article on ESPN hinting at some things that had happened in Patrick Reed's college career. And so I certainly became curious and began investigating that. And it was fell down the rabbit hole. There's a lot there, and I wrote an article. People can read that on Deadspin, the chapter that ended up being the Patrick Reed chapter, and it spawned a whole. He responded. He went on the Golf Channel and responded, and we responded to him, and it was a back and forth with threats of lawsuits and everything like that. But I definitely stand behind the journalistic work I did there, and I think he's a complicated and interesting person, and it's, I think, still one of the chapters I'm most proud of in the book.
So give us your impressions of him. Give us some of the nuance behind golf's most hated man headlines.
Yeah, so I'll give you just the quick backstory in case some of your listeners don't know. But he was, he grew up and was this very intense person, and he dreamed of being a professional golfer from the time he was very young. Combative personality from the very beginning, loved competition, was really good at it. Went to school at Georgia originally, and was accused by his teammates of cheating to improve his score in a qualifying round before a match, and also was accused of stealing items from a locker room, both of which he denied. And, it's tough to get people on record or even off record talking about it, but that was there. And then he was kicked out of Georgia for alcohol infractions after a semester. So he went to Augusta State, where he played for this man named Josh Gregory, who is kind of like the savior figure in Reed's early story. He took him in when not many other people would. And originally, a lot of the patterns repeated. His teammates didn't like him. He was accused of, again, fabricating a score for 2 qualifying rounds in a row. Teammates met, voted to kick him off the team. Josh Gregory intervened and kept him on the team. And the long story short is that he went on to lead Augusta State to 2 national titles. And he did not earn the love or respect of his teammates. In fact, it was kind of a combative feeling the whole time he was there that might have actually helped them in the long run. But he went from, Augusta State to qualifying, I think 6 out of 8 Monday qualifiers he made, which is a really extraordinary record to kind of jumpstart his PGA Tour career. He won at the Wyndham in a playoff against Jordan Spieth. He's won a couple times since. Struggled at the majors originally, but then had a close call last year at the PGA. And, of course, now he's a Masters champion and a Ryder Cup icon, quite honestly, very early in his career. Yeah.
The stench of cheating in a self-policing sport like golf takes a long, 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 long time to go away if it ever does. So that really hangs over him in a big way. And again, to emphasise, he denies this happened. He hit the wrong ball. It was his I don't want to say story, it was his explanation at one point. So that's definitely dogged him. The general lack of friendships is kind of a striking thing, and the brashness and the arrogance, and a guy completely defined by his golf game in a very unhealthy way. Like, to what extent at this stage now at 27 has he matured? Because I'm slightly uncomfortable with almost stories from 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago of a guy who was desperately immature hanging over him, you know? I dare say plenty of athletes would share those characteristics with Reid, especially in their college years.
Yeah, and one thing I think would be interesting to talk about later is the nature of forgiveness in professional sports, and why we're willing to forgive crimes that are far greater than Reid's for different figures in golf and throughout sport, but somehow this is sticking to Reid. But to answer your first question, there was a dynamic on his college golf teams where he was tremendously unpopular and disliked by his teammates. But if you are the kind of person whose inclination is to retreat into private, to isolate yourself, and to sort of exist within a very small orbit of supporters and family, then being a PGA Tour golfer is an ideal vocation for you, because you're allowed to do that. It's encouraged, and in fact probably helps. And so today on the PGA Tour, I've been asked in different radio interviews today, how do the players react? Do they hate the fact that he won? Well, not really, because nobody knows him.
Yeah.
He plays practice rounds by himself. He keeps to himself. He's not someone who goes around annoying people. That's not the Patrick Reid dynamic. Patrick Reid is very content to be cloistered within his own people right now. So more, I guess I would say now, people know him for his competition and his competitive streak, but he's sort of an unknown figure to a lot of his contemporaries.
Yeah, a quote from Ryan Moore, I think it was on Shipnuck's piece. I saw it somewhere. You end up reading so many pieces, it's hard to keep track. Ryan Moore said, I don't really know him. Even though we did play in the Ryder Cup team together, he keeps to himself and does his own thing. Daniel Berger, I think he gets an untrue rep from who he actually is. He's a good guy. You hear people saying he's not a nice guy or they don't like him, but I think that's untrue, to be honest. He's doing his own thing and doing his job, and he doesn't care what people think. He just has his head down, and they take that negatively. Now, look, who's to say? I mean, he could be every bit as obnoxious as he ever was. You just wonder if he's naturally a loner. He's matured somewhat. He's found his family and he's sticking to them, and he's not bothered with PR redemption guff that others would be, and so he's going to spend the next 10, 15 years getting subdued reactions every time he walks up the 18th at Augusta. Admittedly, he's not perfect. I mean, he November 2014 had to apologise for a gay slur on the course, and he did apologise for that, so far from perfect, but it's just been very striking, the coldness over the last 24 hours. Were you slightly uncomfortable with just how poorly received his win was?
Yeah, well, I don't know if, maybe a little uncomfortable. And the idea that I found myself exploring, as I alluded to earlier, is why when any one of us, even in golf, but especially if we broaden it to sports in general, could reel off probably a dozen people who are not well liked in general, have had these episodes that make us not like them, but there are redeeming things about them. And when they win, there's that sense of reaching out to them and wanting to forgive them for what we do. Maybe because we have a sense, probably especially here in America, but maybe there too, that winning kind of is the ultimate redemption act. Yeah. That maybe it makes you can't win without being a good person. Maybe we have that strange belief. But like you said, it hasn't happened with Patrick Reid. And so what is it about him that presents this contrast with the people who we will forgive who have done far worse? And the theory I hit upon, and it's just a theory, is that Patrick Reid is very shut off. It's almost hermetic. I described him on Twitter. He keeps himself at a remove, and I think that there's something almost artificial in the way he deals with people, where you can tell he's withholding himself, and he's not giving you even like the slightest trickle of his humanity, which some people are very good at faking that kind of thing, and I think he's not. And I think that broadcasts to the public in some way that he doesn't care about them. And the natural reaction to that from the public is to say, well, we don't care about you, and in fact, we hate you. And then he responds with his own form of hatred and sealing himself off even more. and the vicious cycle
well,
kind
even
of spirals.
I think that's quite interesting. Even his line about his home crowd seemingly taking to Rory over him and that helping firing him up, that ties in perfectly what you're saying. I mean, he's twisting the reality there, because his initial reaction as he walked to the first tee and realised, oh, they're with Rory, not me. He's a human being. It would have been some kind of sadness.
Yes. And how do people react? How do people, especially with egos, which Patrick Reed has, and he has a hard competitive ego, how do we react to pain? Some people react by displaying their sadness, but I think people who are afraid of showing weakness react by twisting it into some narrative that's going to help them. And that's why I worry about Patrick Reed, because he reminds me of Tiger a little bit, just in the sense that you can tell he's building up these defensive walls around him. Like you said, changing this idea of, oh my God, I'm from Augusta, and even still the people were rooting for the Northern Irish guy over me. And then they rooted for Jordan, and then they rooted for Ricky. How do I react to this? And it's by creating this false narrative of, oh, it just, it gets me going competitively. And clearly that's working for him on the golf course, just like Tiger Woods had his defenses that worked for him on the golf course. But that kind of thing eats at you, and I don't think anybody is that strong over time. And I think Reed should be careful about closing himself off so much that he ends up kind of building a world of stress that leads to a sort of meltdown like we saw with Tiger. Yeah.
And I guess a final point or two, because I know you have to go. When you did sit down and interview him for Slaying the Tiger, I appreciate it's a few years ago now. Certainly there were a few bended truths, let's say, that you discovered from talking to other people. So there is that element to his character. Let's not shy away from that, and let's not paint this guy as a great guy either. But how did you find him generally?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So the original thing when we started the interview is he said, Justine's going to be with me. Is that okay? Justine, his wife. And I'd already heard rumors that this was kind of a controlling person. And so immediately I knew to say, yeah, of course, because if I had said no, I think there would have been no interview. And I included her on the conversation, and I found them both I liked talking to them, and they didn't behave like it was a big chore to talk to me. And Patrick Reed enjoys telling stories of his competitive play. You can tell he takes a lot of pride in it. He probably, like you said, over-identifies with himself as a golfer. But it was fun to listen to his stories. I found Justine warm enough. I liked her. I liked them within that short context.
Sure.
But the broader thing was that, yes, I even at the time, I knew they were telling me some fibs. And they were presenting themselves in a way that felt a little bit fake to me, and in a way that I wanted to crack through, but could tell that they were very committed to this performance in a way that I wasn't going to break in an hour. Forget it. Nobody's that good.
Yeah.
And so I left thinking like, I got a certain story from them. I got a lot of useful information. They seemed like nice people, but also they weren't presenting themselves with any kind of openness, any kind of real openness to the reporter they'd never met. Yeah,
which is maybe understandable as we're please, Shane, don't go and excavate my life 10 years ago and talk to college people I may not have gone on with, because they won't have nice things to say.
It's already started.
So I guess for Reed, look, he's won a major. He's Ryder Cup record is fantastic. He's a really good player. He's only 27 years old. He's going to keep on going, and this kind of sideshow will follow him, especially if he doesn't sit down and do an interview somewhere and try and put some of the stuff to bed in a very genuine way. That's kind of how this is going to go.
Yeah, no, completely agreed. He could. People love someone who wins, and they love someone who's like that. If he could just open up a little and be honest, I think they would go quite a long way for him.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think that's in his nature. I think he's going to continue going about things the way he has, and it's going to be a fascinating ride.
It is, yeah. Because you know what? A redemption story, what better thing for him to do than say, you know what? I did do X, Y, and Z in college. I was a complete douche. I was also 20. Yep. I'm really sorry about it.
And you think, like, the way that you can control your own narrative now, he could write it in the Players Tribune with a ghostwriter who is completely willing to, like, he doesn't even have to come to, like, someone at Sports Illustrated or, for God's sake, me, someone he would never wants to talk to again in his life, probably.
Yeah.
He could control it completely. And, it's the perception of sincerity sometimes is good enough in these cases, but he doesn't even go that far, which I think, it's a very interesting choice.
Yeah, listen, always a pleasure having you on the show and the podcast as well. Shane Ryan, Slaying the Tiger, by the way, is the book, A Year Inside the Ropes on the new PGA Tour. I'm sure people may be curious to dig out the book again. Shane, thanks a million.
All right, thank you. Good to see you in person. This is the first time I know what you look like now.
Very exciting. Thanks a million. Good luck.
Have a good one.
Hey, hope you enjoyed that latest offering from Off the Ball. If you want to subscribe, and you should, check out just up here. All our latest stuff is just down here. Generally, knock yourself out.